In the last video, we had a look at the hardware low latency monitoring option that we have available when using supported interfaces. And before that, we had a look at the native low latency monitoring option that we have available when using the new software monitoring and the new native low latency monitoring options. Now, in this video, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a look at using instrument low latency monitoring. So to start off with here, let's go ahead and just close this GUI for a second. Now, as you recall, in the previous videos, we activated the native low latency monitoring option by clicking this Z over here in our main outs. And of course, if we had headphones that were associated with the process as well using QSense, we would activate those as well. Now, with respect to instruments, there's two different sections where we can activate low latency monitoring for virtual instruments. The first section is in the instrument rack over here. So you'll see, for example, I'm going to just hide this for a second. We can make this view visible by simply clicking this instrument tab. Now, I currently have this track record enabled, so you'll see that we have a green instance of Presence XT, and that's the virtual instrument that I'm going to be using for this overdub over here. Now, in addition to that, you'll also see that this plugin is green. In fact, all of these plugins are green if I was to make them show up. They're all green over here. But I'm only going to be using one or two of them, so we'll try to find something that fits the mix. Now, essentially, with respect to how this works, it's not that different from the native low latency monitoring path for audio tracks, in that we have to make sure that it's enabled. But the main key difference over here is that it is using virtual instruments and not audio. And like I said, this is a completely separate path. So I've got my dropout protection set to medium. You know what, for this, I might want to bump it up to high just to be safe. In my audio device tabs, I'm going with a device block size of 64. And as you can see, that yields me an 8.04 milliseconds low latency figure. And I think that's going to be perfect for what I need to do over here. So let's go ahead and click OK. All right, so now, like I said, all we have to do is just activate this over here. Now you see the minute this is activated, it has the Z in the bottom over here. And also we can see the green plugin, which is indicating it's in the low latency path. And also we see the instrument itself, the power button of the actual instrument is in green. So this is just visual indications that we're listening or we're recording in a low latency monitoring path for virtual instruments. Now, the minute I take this out of record mode, it's in the playback buffer. And if I had something that was recorded, you would see that that would be running from the playback buffer instead of our low latency monitoring path buffer. All right, a little bit confusing, but essentially it works very similar to using native low latency monitoring for audio, except we have the amazing performance that we can do it for virtual instruments. So the first thing I'm going to do over here is record enable my track. And as we see, we now have this Z, and this is just an indication, again, that we're in the low latency monitoring mode. So now here's the concept over here. I've actually got the same track that I use for my vocal production masterclass course, and this is actually my mix. So if we look at my mixer over here, I've got quite a lot going on in terms of my mix. Now, the only thing I've really done over here is I removed my limiter, and I also removed a tape saturation plugin. But essentially now we're actually monitoring through an SSL bus compressor from Waves, which is a fantastic sounding bus compressor. So essentially my entire mix, my gain staging, the arrangement, everything is intact from where I left off. So like I said, this is a pretty heavy session, but this is what's so incredible about this new option to use low latency monitoring with virtual instruments. Okay, so what I'm going to do over here is let's just change our view to something a little bit more manageable and where we can see some screen real estate over here. Now, the first thing I want to do is I've got some different plugins set up over here, and I want to test these out in relation to the actual track. Let's just go ahead here. I'm probably going to leave this on top of the mix so we can hear it. But now, another thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to open up my virtual QWERTY keyboard so that I have a controller now. So now I can play directly from my Mac keyboard. Now, one thing worth noting over here is just to kind of make this a fair test and just to kind of drill home the point that I made in my previous video, I'm actually using the Studio 192 as opposed to the Quantum. Now, what's the reason for this? Well, my main reasoning for doing this is just to kind of prove my point that you can use an interface using hardware low latency monitoring, but you're getting low latency monitoring on your virtual instruments. This didn't used to be possible, and this to me is a really powerful feature. So I've got this set for 64 samples, and I've also got this set up over here to be a high dropout protection level. And I think that's going to be more than good enough to get our performance in our CPU where we need it to be. So let's go ahead and click OK. Now, one thing I do want to do over here is let's go ahead and bring up the performance monitor. I don't really need to see all the device information, although I could double check to see if any of these plugins over here are adding quite a lot of latency. So for example, here we have the CLA base currently inactive. We'd have to activate these to see what they're reporting. Okay, so CLA base is actually adding 2.8 milliseconds to my latency. So that might not be the best one to use. So how about we just make a decision right now and say that we're going to pull this out of the signal chain. And I'm going to try to come up with a bass sound between guitar amp by Waves, bass amp room by Softtube, and then I always like a CLA 3A or an LA 3A on bass just to kind of tame the transients. So the guitar amp plugin, let's just see if we can find it over here. Scroll down past all of these fat channels. Okay, that's nice. We're looking at a 0.8 milliseconds in terms of latency. Now let's have a look at the bass amp room. Okay, brilliant. We're at 0.1 milliseconds of latency. So I think these are some good choices in order to be able to find something. Let's leave the performance monitor up on our screen. Maybe we can put it down here in the bottom left, just so we can keep an eye on our performance while I'm playing back this track. Because keep in mind, this track was mixed and the CPU load was sitting quite high on 3.3.4. And now I'm attempting to do an overdub with a virtual instrument on a fully mixed track with mix bus processing plugins in place. Now this in 3.3.4 at a 64 device block size, I can tell you wouldn't have been possible. All right, so let's have a look, or let's have a listen first to the raw track over here in terms of the raw sound of Presence XT. All right, so this is an instrument by E-Instruments that was done for Presence XT. And it's a fantastic sounding sampled bass instrument where we've got a couple different options in terms of the bass sounds. Classic finger, classic pick, and then we have vintage finger and vintage pick. And they're just different sounding basses. So I've essentially just pulled up something that I think is going to work. So let's go ahead here and I'm going to close this off and let's just play from here, again, using my QWERTY keyboard. And let's see how this raw bass sound fits in. Actually, that's a really good fit. So I think we'll stick with that. Now, one thing that I can try out is I want to do something different to the click because I'm going to be doing offbeats. Let's open up our metronome setup over here and I'm going to bring up the offbeat in my click setup. Okay, so I think that's going to help me in terms of my performance, in terms of getting those offbeats. So here it is without, and here it is with. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So I think essentially we're ready to record a take, but let's actually try out some different amp simulators. And also, first off, I'm going to activate this compressor on the back end. Now keep in mind, this is in green over here. Okay, so I like what that's doing. Let's try the bass amp room out by Softtube. We'll take it off. So it adds a nice low end. Let's see how that sounds. Okay, not sure if that works. We'll try the guitar amp stereo plugin, and that is a plugin from Waves. We'll try that out, see how this sounds. Okay, you know what? I'm actually liking the sound of it just with the CLA 3A compressor. So let's go ahead, we're going to do that, and let's just go ahead and commit to those sounds in terms of that's what I'm going to use. And I'm going to go ahead and just drop into record mode right from here. Now, like I said, I'm going to be using the QWERTY keyboard, and this is a little awkward for me to do with a SM7B in front of my face, but let's give it a shot. Okay, so I'm really happy with that. Now, technically speaking, I could go in here and I could quantize this and change all my velocities, but that's not really what this video is about. This video is simply about stating the fact that I've got a full mix over here and a lot of plugins. I have mix bus processing intact. I've got a session that was playing at a pretty high CPU load on 3.3.4, and I just hopped in with a USB 2 interface. I just hopped in and did a punch in with a virtual instrument with no perceivable latency on my end, using my computer keyboard, and my CPU didn't really take a hit at all. The dropout protection really kind of ensured that I didn't get any clicks or pops, not in my instrument track, not in my playback tracks. This is incredibly powerful. And obviously, depending on the size of the virtual instrument and how much system resources the virtual instrument is taking up, you're going to get different results. And certain virtual instruments are really efficient where others are not. But the whole point I'm trying to make over here is that we now have the ability to do low latency punch-ins and low latency monitoring with virtual instruments inside Studio One 3.5. Previously in 3.4, if I had to do this punch-in right now, I really don't know what I would have done. I would have had to probably deal with something like 256 device block size, a lot of audible latency. I wouldn't even have dreamed about putting up a plugin on the actual track. I would have definitely bypassed any mix bus processing that was happening on. So this has really opened up a whole new level of flexibility in terms of allowing users to do punch-ins in productions. And this can really help out when you're trying to work out different ideas, or you change your mind at the last minute, or the artist says, you know, I'm not feeling that, or can we change that bass part? We're now making it possible to do things without taxing our CPU. Now, this is currently set to record enabled, and that puts it in the zero latency or the low latency virtual instrument monitoring path. Let's go ahead and deselect this over here. You can just see that my CPU just dropped from 21 to 13%. Let's go ahead and play this back, see how it sounds. Perfect. Now I could essentially choose to leave this as a virtual instrument with MIDI information, or I could take advantage of one of Studio One's amazing options, which would be transforming this to an audio track. So I could just go ahead and do that right now. I could render my inserts, I could preserve the instrument track state, and I could also remove this instrument. So now I'm just going to go ahead here and transform this to an audio track. And now this has been rendered to audio. And if I need to make any adjustments to this, I can quite simply hop back in over here and transform this back into an instrument track. And now I'm ready to do my punch-ins back to MIDI again. But like I said, a whole new slew of opportunities available for us in terms of what low latency instrument monitoring brings to the table for Studio One 3.5. Now in the next video, I want to start taking a look at some of the miscellaneous improvements and new features that we have in Studio One 3.5. Catch you in the next video.